All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie, and I'm an event host for Bank Square Books and Savoy Bookshop and Café. We are delighted that you are able to join us for this evening's virtual event, and there are a few things to go over before we begin. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you should see a chat button. We encourage you to use it during the event. Join in, say hello, and let us know where you're viewing from. We ask that you adhere to our virtual event code of conduct, which has been posted in the chat. You can also ask questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and you can vote for those that are most interesting to you. We will get to those audience questions at the end of the event, but first, Yi Shun Lai and Pam Mandel are going to be speaking in conversation together. If you need to turn on closed captioning, there should be a closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. We are just testing that out tonight, so that is a new feature, and hopefully that works well. If you'd like to purchase a copy of tonight's books, we are going to be posting links in the chat throughout the event. This will take you directly to our website where you can complete your purchase. Books ordered through the link from tonight's event will come with signed book plates. Please note that it might take us a few extra days to fulfill your orders, but we will get them shipped out or made available for pickup as soon as possible. Without further ado, I am delighted to introduce Yi Shun Lai tonight to discuss pinups. She is a writer and editor living in Southern California, and she teaches in the MFA programs at Bay Path and Southern New Hampshire universities, and at weekend retreats around the country. She was, for a time, the youngest ever writer for the legendary J. Peterman catalog, and if you're a Seinfeld fan, you should be very familiar with that name. We also have Pam Mandel with us tonight to talk about her book, The Same River Twice. Pam began her career as a travel writer in the mid-90s with her blog, Nerd's Eye View. She's had her stories published by Afar, Lonely Planet, Seattle Met, Sunset, and Across the Web. She's also been to all 7 continents. Yi Shun and Pam will be in conversation together for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to your questions that have been submitted through the question button. And now I'll ask our panelists to turn on their cameras and mics, and I'll turn it over to them. Hello.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see you all. Waiting for Pam to pop up.
There we go.
There
Hi.
she is.
It's a whole new world.
All right, guys, take it away.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So Pam's going to read first tonight because it's nearly her Burke's birthday. Pam,
It is my birthday, you guys. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And here it is. And I'm still kind of not over the fact that it's something I can hold in my hands. So I'm going to read just a tiny section of my book that takes place in Israel in the very early 80s. And this particular part of the book is pretty sweet and romantic. And the book is not that. I just want you to know that. But this is such a lovely section, and it's a rainy day here in Seattle, and we're in the middle of this chaotic era. And so I thought a nice little mental vacation would be a good idea for now. At dawn, we walked out to the highway to hitch nearly 400 miles to Dahab, a rugged kibbutz village on the edge of the Red Sea. Getting rides wasn't difficult. Eli wore his military gear, and I was a teenage girl. People stopped. We were traveling light, 2 small day packs and 2 sleeping bags. We got our first ride right away, and then our second. We were never on the roadside for long. We got in and out of military trucks, throwing our bags in the back. Eli would put me in the middle and throw his arm around my shoulders. He'd charm each driver with his easy manner, with his stories, and he'd introduce me like a prize. His American girlfriend. By dusk that same day, we were unrolling our sleeping bags on the sand, under the palm trees, the Sinai Mountains, a shadow behind us, the Red Sea whispering in front of us. Sinai was mostly a barren wedge of land between Jordan, Egypt, and Israel. It was all pale earth and scrub plants with a mountain range in the middle where supposedly Moses had received the 10 Commandments from God. Israel and Egypt had been battling for control of Sinai since 1967, in no small part because the Suez Canal, at the top end of the Egyptian side of the wedge, was a major channel for international shipping. In 1979, the 2 countries signed a peace treaty. The land would eventually all go back to Egypt. It was in transition when I was there. The Israelis were gradually shutting things down, dismantling their army bases, closing a few tough desert farming co-ops. In the meantime, religious pilgrims on Holy Land tours were still venturing inland to the site of Moses' burning bush, while divers and no-frills travelers would eat popsicles on the shore and explore the vibrant reef just below the surface of the Red Sea. We spent a week camping on the beach. Maybe it was 10 days, time didn't matter. Most of the time, Eli was stripped down to nothing but his sandals. The beach was an even strip of sand with palm trees here and there, the sharp leaves casting equally sharp outlines onto the pale ground. The nearby kibbutz had a small shop, a cafe, and freshwater showers for campers and beachgoers who got tired of being crusted with salt. The kibbutz rented campsites and had hostel-style bunks, but there was no need for formal camping. It was so dry, there was zero chance of rain. It was too dry for mosquitoes, and it was never cold. And it was safe. We didn't think twice about leaving our things unattended while we swam. At night, the only light came from the perimeter of the kibbutz and the pinholes of the stars punched in the black blanket of the sky. There was a nomadic Bedouin population in the Sinai, Arabic speakers who had lived in the desert for ages. Bedouin boys would walk down the beach selling strong Turkish coffee and warm, fire-charred flatbread. The men would drive slowly across the sand in their Mercedes sedans, collecting a few shekels from anyone who wanted to rent a palm leaf shack for privacy. Sometimes they had ice chests filled with cold beer and bottled water in the trunks of their fancy cars. Eli always made time to talk to the Bedouins. They were covered head to toe in their black robes and keffiyeh. Eli would stand there naked but for his sandals, one hand on the fender of a big sedan, laughing with the Bedouin men like they were his brothers. Once or twice a day, Eli would pull on his shorts and wander off, leaving me to read a Vonnegut novel or a battered Agatha Christie mystery, whatever book I'd managed to scrounge off other travelers, with my back up against the palm tree. I'd hear the crunch of his sandals and look up when he called my name or some Hebrew term of affection. Hey, Hamoudi, sweetie. He'd stand in front of me with that big, sleepy smile, his hands full of chewy pita sandwiches stuffed with grilled vegetables, the tahini sauce making the paper wrapper stick to the bread. He'd make a cold beer appear from the side pocket of his cargo shorts. Sometimes he brought ice cream too. During the day, we'd wander into the warm waters of the Red Sea, walking in the shallows to spot the bright tropical fish. Eli might appear with a mask and a snorkel. I borrowed it from that guy over there. He would point down the beach with his chin. Thank you, he'd shout, and a silhouette of a person would wave our direction. I'd pull on a t-shirt to keep the sun off my back while I floated above the shallow reef, hypnotized by all the life just below the surface of the water. After dark, we'd crash into each other until we were worn out. Then we'd lie on the sand, listening to the surf until we fell asleep. I was enchanted. I wanted nothing at all. When it came time for me to go back north to school, for Eli to report back to the Army, I dragged my feet as we walked to the highway at dawn. Thank you.
I love that.
Thank you.
I cannot wait for you all to read this book. I was very lucky. I got to read the whole thing and I just am just blown away. I'm super excited to see what you all think of it on Goodreads and all those review sites that we're supposed to go to, including Big Gorilla ebook retailer, right? that we shall not mention today. So this is Pinups. It is what my friend Roz calls the golden retriever puppy of books because it is tiny and cute and very, very fuzzy. But it also is about something that I think is really relevant this time of our life. It's about representation, right, in outdoor sports in particular. But it's something that I hope gets us thinking about representation in other areas of our life. Okay, so I'll read from you a couple pages in the middle here. I am utterly fascinated by the field of leadership studies. Point me to a TED Talk about organizational psychology and look for me hours later deep in a rabbit warren generated by that one study the speaker referenced and bolstered by whatever studies that study may have leaned on for its results. One more hour later, and I'm in the bookshop.org pages. It does say Amazon pages here, but I'm not going to, go with that. Picking up books written about these studies. Women in leadership is a particularly deep hole for me to fall into. I'm fascinated by the studies that explore how and why some women treat each other badly in workplaces. Anecdote after anecdote, study after study, I parse how to be a better leader, a more supportive person. Psychologists have posited everything from a deep biological drive. Women have always had to compete for mates, and the workplace is a version of that, they say, to tokenism, the curious situation by which the sole other in any group begins to take on the attributes of the majority just to be able to fit in. This is where you find the women who claim they're just one of the guys or not like other women. But in the world of sport, where things are judged on a much more animal level, faster, stronger, more agile, maybe it isn't as hard to buoy another of your gender and not as hard to welcome them into your midst. Whatever the reason, it wasn't until I found the women who adventure raced, the big dogs in my pack, that I began to settle into the possibility that outdoor sport was even a remote possibility for me. Sure, there was a remote element of odd woman out still. Most racing teams I knew have comprised 3 men, 1 woman, or 2 men, 1 woman. Every once in a while, you'd see a duo of women making their way across a race course, but you usually find mixed gender couples racing. The premium division in adventure racing is co-ed, and the sport was conceived of as a co-ed endeavor. In adventure racing, I felt welcome and then at home. Whether that was due to the paucity of women I encountered or the more level playing field, I couldn't tell you. Or maybe it was because there were so many new things to learn that everyone was hopeless at something. That guy with the runner's legs was probably a terrible navigator. The strong paddler might very well be an awful climber or afraid of heights. And the person who was good at all of those things was probably just a really bad teammate. We knew one guy who was so driven he destroyed his calf, forcing himself through a cramp, taking out the entire team. I'd finally found a place where it was okay for me to be semi-competent or not competent at all, so long as you were improving, or you could walk out of a class or an event having learned something new. In adventure racing, it seemed, no one is expert. Everyone made mistakes, even if they were as basic as leaving your maps in your gear bin, leaving your team with no way of navigating, or falling asleep on your bicycle, or packing the wrong food. These may or may not be true stories. They may or may not have all happened to me. You towed the line with professionals, the teams who took home cash prizes and who were sponsored, and teams were encouraged to help each other on the race course. I had finally found a song you didn't need to know all the words to in order to be able to be part of the in crowd. And even though it was another relationship that had landed me there, I was finally rooting around in mud and exploring the landscape and hanging out with boys I liked for a long period of time over long training days. I never did learn how to ride a BMX bike, but I did get to be pretty good on a bicycle, either road or mountain. And it was in the bike saddle that I finally figured out what it meant to feel adept and confident. It's easy now to see why I failed in those early days of finding a home in sport. I didn't look for women, and I certainly didn't look for the women who looked like me, who shared my features, sure, but who also shared my culture and my background. I didn't understand that they existed. I have spent most of my life swaddled in privilege. My parents paid for my expensive private college education. They helped me through a rough spot when I first started freelancing, and my husband's steady job affords us great health insurance, as well as a backup salary should I have a lean month or so of freelancing. We own 2 cars and 5 bicycles between us, and we live in a pretentious little suburb of Los Angeles, the kind with a coffee bean and tea leaf, a Starbucks, and a pan quotidian. It's embarrassing to realize now that I've gravitated naturally to sports that are equipment heavy and whose competitions come with heavy entrance fees. Take skiing, for instance. What is it about all that equipment that appeals to anyone? Big clunky boots, poles, helmets, goggles, snowsuits that take up valuable closet real estate. I lived in Southern California when I got into skiing. You have to make a gargantuan effort to find a need for snowsuits. Road riding, the kind where you get on a bike that can take you from Boston to New York, is no different. You buy an expensive bike. The road bike in my garage now cost me $5,000 in 2008. And then there's all the expensive Lycra and spandex. And the shoes, which always run upwards of $100, but which, fair play, do last for an awfully long time. Oh, and the helmet, obviously. Gloves, lights, handlebar top computer to tell you precious little things like your cadence and your speed. Rock climbing is another. Seems so pure, doesn't it? You, the rock, sunrise, Grippy shoes, $100. Chalk bag, $30. Harness, $50 minimum. You can wear your own pants and stuff, but once you get to the fancy rock, you're going to want some ropes and an ATC and some handy carabiners, which, okay, you can also use to hand your hangback off a restaurant table with. They're very multitasking. But that harness you're only going to wear for one purpose, trust me. And how do you think you're going to get to all those legendary rocks? You're not going to do it on the intercity bus, that's for sure. Oh, the city rock gyms, you say? It's not a mistake that you're apt to find those in the more Tony parts of town. The one I used to go to is in New York City, Lincoln Square, just down the street from Lincoln Plaza and the Metropolitan Opera. There's another cheaper one closer to Hell's Kitchen, but it's not as convenient as the one in Lincoln Square. Adventure racing is the mother of all gear sports, since it's a minimum of 3 sports rolled up into one event. Your running shoes will need to be very, very grippy. Dedicated trail runners, at least. Gaiters to go with those so you won't get too much dirt in your shoes. And then you'll want a good, sturdy mountain bike and another pair of shoes that you can both clip into your bike into and walk in, because the terrain is tricky and not always bike friendly. Then you will need a paddle for the canoe or kayak leg and your own life jacket. You want a good compass. And then you can start thinking about clothing and required equipment, lightweight first aid kit, knife, wicking everything, and waterproof everything else. It adds up really, really fast. At some point in my bicycling and adventure racing life, and probably after I become too lazy to pack all of that adventure racing gear every weekend for a multi-sport workout with friends, I became interested in triathlon. And then a slow, ugly dawn came upon me. All these sports, every single one I've ever invested in, are majority white. Okay, thank you. Cool. Okay, so we're going to start off with our questions and answers for each other. This is a set of discussion questions that I've always been curious about and that I think Pam will be able to help me answer. So I'll start off and then we'll kind of back and forth a little, right? Questions for each other. Okay. All right, so the first question is, in each of our books, the theme of what demarcates a good girl always comes up, right? And in The Same River Twice, it first comes up when you meet Eli's dad, right? Where his father is convinced that something is wrong with you because you are so far away from your Southern California home. And in pinups, it's pretty much like the background of the whole book, like what comprises this good girl mentality. So we're both of the same generation, and I think we're seeing some change, but I'm curious to see like what you think this says about what people expect from girls and what they may have, how they might have changed from where we were when we were growing up.
I really hope that expectations have changed significantly. I don't have kids, right? And so I'm not in the process of projecting those expectations on the next generation of kids myself. I can only see what's happening with other ones. So I personally have no expectations for these kids that don't exist, right? I don't have that. I don't know what it means to project those expectations. And I do think that things have changed significantly, but, or rather I hope that, but when I was growing up, you know, I probably should, maybe you know this, Yi Shun, do you know when Title IX was passed?
I do know that. It was passed in 1971, I want to say.
Right.
All right.
So okay, let's say it was passed in 1971, and then how much longer did it take for that to become integrated into, Kim Rogers says it's 1972. She's looking it up.
72. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. So, you know, I was born in 1964. So I have a whole block of time where there was no Title IX and when there was no question that Title IX even needed to exist, right? So I guess I think that you know, so there's a whole generation of people who grew up with Title IX in place. And so they had support in that whole, like the idea of playing outside, the idea of being outside. But I still think there are huge sectors of society that are dominated by dudes. You know, I do a day job in tech and there are still times when I'm the only woman in the room. And that to me remains shocking. And the fact I've worked with women who are great programmers, who are great testers. I worked in an all female test pod for a little while. And most of them were a good decade, 15 years younger than me. And so they are an indication of that things have changed since then. But we're definitely still, my generation was still being pushed into certain roles. And if you weren't so willing to adopt those roles, you definitely ended up as an outsider. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's great that you bring up Title IX for a couple of reasons. First of all, I just finished writing an exhibit for the Nixon Foundation on some work that he did in order to triple the number of women who were hired into policy-making decisions in his administration. And Title IX was a big part of that, right? And one of the very first things that came out of Title IX was Maria Pepe, who wanted to play Little League baseball. And she got away with it for like 3 games, and she was doing really well. She's a pitcher, and then Little League headquarters decided to come down on her, and they threatened to ban the entire Little League franchise from the team from the town that she was playing for. So not only would the team be, you know, penalized, it would also be the entire township that was penalized from Little League. And I think one of the things that really makes me crazy about that story is that there's this, it's tokenism in like another really bad sense, right? It's like, we're going to make this girl the token of everything that can go wrong if a girl tries to step outside of the normal boundaries.
It's a lot to carry. That role is a lot to carry, right? And one person should not have to carry it.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't think she ever played again is a thing, you know? And so it's, you know, I don't have kids either, but I look at my niece who's 7 years old now. And, you know, I'm sending her a ton of books that are all about, you know, girls doing these wonderful things or trying to broaden her sense of where girls can be in the world, right? Ruby McConnell wrote a really wonderful series of guidebooks. One is like a woman's guide to the wild, and the second one is a girl's guide to the wild. And it comes to this with these like wonderful workbooks that you can fill out with your kid or with your niece or the younger person in your life or whichever. And I think the more we see of this kind of thing, the better we are all the way around, right? So it's like the more stories we tell about women who are doing unusual things, whether it be in tech or in the outdoors or traveling to different places, then the better off, you know, we all will be. But I do wonder if we're seeing a change in that direction, because I still see women being penalized. I mean, the WNBA players are still making a fraction of what the NBA players make, right? Yeah. So I don't know where the change comes from.
Yeah, but I also think about the role models that got held up when I was growing up too. So women who were grown ass women my age who were on the stage and who were held up as role models were also the subject of a lot of jokes, right? You think about Billie Jean King. Billie Jean King was a punchline for a long time, right? And you know, she was a professional athlete and she was a punchline. And so, you know, when that's going on at this, your role model is, you know, this is an extremely powerful, skilled person, but also who gets demoted to being a punchline, then like, where do you turn to find those things?
Yeah.
I don't know, right? I feel like there is a lot more today. And like, I mean, we're in the middle of this crazy election, right? And all of the young brown women have been reelected to their seat. It's so awesome. And that gives me a lot of hope, but that's not something I ever would have seen as a kid.
Yeah, it's true. And I think it's so remarkable that we are seeing all these young brown women who are stepping up, you know, and it reminds me of, do you remember the essay that Caroline Paul wrote a couple of years ago for New York Times Magazine? Or I think it was just for the normal opinion section of the paper. But she wrote an essay about how we tell our girls to be careful much more than we tell our boys to be careful. You know, in society,
oh yeah,
just, you know, be careful is one of those things that you just kind of throw out there. And it just is, we don't seem to be allowed to fall down and get hurt, you know, and then be told to get back up again. Right. Yeah. And then to draw from Angela Duckworth's work on grit, it's like that not having that reinforcement keeps us from getting up the 8th time when we fall down 7 times. Right. So, you know, we need to have that kind of network. But I think to the original point, that I feel like there is so much more of a support network around women and girls who want to do different things, even in their 2nd and 3rd acts in life, right? And that's you know, that's a really good thing, I think, that we're seeing. So
yeah. I'm gonna move to topic 2. So you and I both have these new-ish projects. You have Undomesticated, which is about women in travel, and I have Statesider, which is about American culture. And by the way, so I see her, she's on here, Kim S. Rogers is on here, and I don't know if she knows this, but I want to tell her that I picked up a copy today of the Best American Travel Writing, and Following the Albatross Home is listed in the back as a notable. So hey, congratulations and thank you, Kim. Buy this compilation and, you know, read Statesider. Anyway, so we both have these projects. What do you started Undomesticated? What's missing from travel that you think Undomesticated is going to provide?
Yeah, so that project started because my co-founder, Tiffany Hawk, received a comment from an agent that she was talking to about how stories about women do better when they're domestic, quote unquote, right? And Tiffany was really shocked. Like, she didn't know if the agent meant that women should be more domesticated and that's when stories do better, or if the stories about,
say that again, please.
Yes, stories about women do better when they're domesticated.
Okay.
Or sorry, when they're domestic.
Okay.
So she didn't know if the agent meant, oh, the stories have to be domestic or the women should be domestic. But either way, it kind of made the hairs on the back of her neck go up, right? So she thought, well, why don't we look and, you know, see if we can start a venue that celebrates the craft of talking about other cultures in a respectful way, right? And recasting that sense of, like, most travel writing, or a lot of travel writing has been in the past, you know, 18 exotic ways to see Thailand, right? Or there's this cast of, like, oh, how weird is the food, right? Or if you go to Malawi, there's always that story about people drinking blood from, you know, cows' necks or whatever. And it's always like the freakish exotic things, you know? So we wanted to do more stories about women who are living in the world boldly, is the tagline of the publication. And it really is mostly about, you know, finding women who are making their ways in the world, whether in an international fashion, that doesn't sort of lean on the exotic or the strange, you know, in order for it to be a compelling, good story. So that was really, you know, the background of it. But for Statesider, I think it kind of hits a similar tone, right? In that you're looking for the stories that are unusual, right? Where, you know, people might think of Mitchell's Corn Palace, for instance, right? And you have a different cast on that. It's not just Mitchell's Corn Palace that's interesting, that's out there, right?
Right. I mean, that's a weird example.
It's the first thing that came to my mind.
I've been to a Corn Palace, and now I'm like, it was a couple of years ago. and Peter is on here too. And I actually have been to the Corn Palace with Peter. And so that's funny. And I had very bad coffee near the Corn Palace. This is what I remember about the Corn Palace, is that it was a hard place to find good coffee. But so again, we're in the middle of this election, right? And there's this classic story about the American diner, right? The American diner is a very specific thing, but the United States is a lot more complex than this very simple narrative about what the US is, right? I feel like we're leaving out so much when we talk about what the US is. Now, I love a good road trip, and the idea of like driving down Route 66 and those old mid-century modern hotels and eating in, like, I love that stuff. But there's also, just for clarity, we run some original work and we do some aggregation, right? And so we pull stories that show the complexity of American culture. And one of the things that we're still talking about in our back channel Slack is that there was this series on Punjabi truck drivers and the places where they stop to get their meals. Apparently there's amazing Indian food across the US at these truck stops, right? And I really wanted to like get a ride along and see what that's like to experience, right? Like to see America from like the cab of a truck, and then to have really good Punjabi cuisine at some place where there's also a Dunkin' Donuts and a place where you can use quarters to get a shower, right? Like those are American stories too, right? And so we're putting a light on the things that are American stories as well. We spend a lot of time trying to shine a light on history. Like whenever anybody runs a plantation story about weddings, we're like, oh, hey, by the way, maybe stop doing that. And here's a bunch of really smart writing about why that's a bad idea. And we're not writing about this stuff. We're not trying to say like, this is my experience. These are smarter people than we are talking about maybe your plantation wedding is dismissive, for lack of a better word. So the other thing was that when we looked at the travel space for the US, it was very unadventurous culturally, right? There's lots of great outdoors adventure. You know, everybody loves the national parks. Again, I love the national parks so much with my whole heart. We have, fantastic road trips. We have incredible nature, but we don't interrogate American culture with the same way I feel that we interrogate culture when we go abroad. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to like look homeward and be like, oh, look at all the things we have here. This is incredible. I didn't know much about the history of Jewish immigrants in the South. And I was knocking around the Mississippi Delta by myself for 10 days. And I drove into, I'm going to say the name of it. I always want to call it Clarksville, and I can't remember if it's Clarksville or Clarksdale. It's one of the two. It's where the crossroads is. It's where supposedly, anyway, so I drove into the crossroads from the wrong way, the way that people don't usually go in there. And the first thing I saw was a Jewish cemetery. And I went, wait a minute, hold on. Like I knew about the South to some degree, right? I knew that there's cotton, there's slavery, there's plantations, there's, all this stuff is happening there. And there was this sign of something that I didn't expect to be there. And they had been there. The oldest stones there were from the early 1900s. So they've been there for a good long time. So, that idea of like being like, there's a whole other thing happening here that we're not paying attention to when we think about America. And Statesider is trying to broaden our view of what it means to be American and to bring in all the stuff that's great about it. Like there's a reason my town has awesome pho, right? Like it's not just salmon here. We have amazing pho, and it's because we have a huge Vietnamese population. Why are they here? How did they get here? We also have an incredible Ethiopian food. So I think a lot about these kinds of things, and we all do at Stateside. We think a lot about these kinds of things and giving the American narrative the diversity it deserves.
Yeah, I think you're 100% spot on about that, and something you just said earlier really struck me. This idea of not doing enough interrogation, right, of the American life and what all those layers mean. And I think we at Undomesticated, we look at it the same way, right? It's like when you live abroad, for instance, there's all these different layers to being an expat, right, that you might not even consider. People think it's the expat lifestyle. You go hang out at the expat bar all the time, and you
Yeah.
live in the gated community and all that. And it's like there's so much more to it than just that, right? And that's the same thing with travel as well. When you go abroad, you need to really look deeper. We were in I was in Iceland with my parents a couple of years ago, and I remember noticing that there were a lot of Thai restaurants in Reykjavik, which is so strange, And then it turns out that there's a specific reason for that. Just like you said, there's a reason that West Seattle has a lot of pho, right? There's a whole big reason that has to do with immigration and people, the way that people got married and who they decided to get married to and all that. That resulted in this massive Thai community that exists in Reykjavik, which is
Right.
so weird, So we
Yeah.
need to be, I don't know, more creative about and more imaginative about the things that we're looking at, and kind of really interrogate the things we're looking at, as opposed to just like looking at something and taking it for face value and defaulting to, oh, that's strange, I'm going to write about that, and then not go any deeper than that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
There's like that initial reaction where you're like, that's weird. And then you're like, no, wait, maybe it's not weird. Maybe there's actually like I think it's weird because it doesn't meet my expectations for the place.
Right.
Right. Like I don't expect to find awesome Thai food in Reykjavik. And then when I do, it's just like we could dismiss it as a novelty, or
Right.
we could be like, why are all these Thai people in Reykjavik? Like,
Yeah.
what were Jewish immigrants doing in the South? What did their presence mean there? All these questions. Like, there's a large Cambodian community not far from where I live. Like, why are they here? How did they get here? How long have they been here? It's not just that I can get great fish cakes and noodles.
Right.
There's more to it than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm always reminded of Chimamanda Ngozi's Adichie's Danger of a Single
Americana?
Story. Actually, I was thinking of her TED Talk, that Danger of a Single Story TED Talk, where she talks
Okay.
about how, like, we look at something and we see the one layer of it, but when you interrogate that further, there's so much more richness there to be had.
Yeah.
And how critical it is to go a little bit further and push yourself a little bit harder, and not be lazy at the end of the day, right? About any of your writing or about any of the stuff that you're intaking. So, okay, cool. So this next question is kind of a big one. How do we think the state of women's writing has changed in the past decade or so, and where do we see it going in the future?
So I thought about this question a lot, and I had to go look when I had access, when I started reading, and I mentioned all these writers in my book specifically because they were super influential to me when I was traveling and when I was trying to learn how to be a young writer, all these things. They're all men. Like, they were all men. Everybody I read, men. There were no women in my reading list, right? And I had to go look today to be like, who should I have been reading at the time? Like, I didn't know. So first of all, the fact that there's just a presence of a voice that's not just men in travel is huge. It's huge. And I'm not saying that they didn't exist, because they did, but there was such a tiny percentage of what was happening, right?
Do you think that even if there were a lot of women writing back then, right? Because you posted a photograph today of your book next to the other travel books, and you are surrounded by men. Just on that bookshelf alone, you're surrounded by, Pico Iyer is right below you in that photo, and Pico Iyer has been writing for a really long time, right? So he's still hanging around and he's still producing great work, right? But the question is, where is the room for all the women writers that are now making their names, right? Like, how come we're not seeing more of those books pop up on bookshelves? Why are you not surrounded by women travel writers, right? So it's just, I don't know. I mean, this is where representation comes in, right? It's like the more people see women like you and like Kim producing books, and the more work is put out there on the bookshelves, the better off I think we're going to be for everybody,
I hear that domesticated women do better.
I don't know. Hold on a second. I'm going to walk into my kitchen and open my oven door and have a look. See if there's any domesticated women hanging out in there. But yeah, I mean, what I was getting at earlier, which I didn't end up finishing up my thought on, but I'm wondering if we do a lot of assimilating as women, right? We sort of try to slot into where it matters. And so I'm wondering, like, if we weren't so hampered back then by this one acceptable style of travel writing, would we have produced something new and different? Or do you think that would have mattered? I mean, do you think there were voices that were being kind of stifled at the end of the day, or were they looking for specific types of stories? And so we were unable to tell our own?
Suspect the latter, right? Like, we're still throwing out the gatekeepers. Like, I have 75 rejections for my book, right? 75 rejections. It's a lot. I think it doesn't suck as a book. I think it's okay. Like, I think it was worthy of being published. And I have 75 rejections. That's a lot. And so I think that until we have more imaginative gatekeepers, or there are more points of access to getting work like this out into the world, it's still going to be really hard.
Yeah.
And I think it's not just travel. I think it's all kinds of writing. It's really unfortunate that women's writing is even considered a thing, right? Like, people don't talk about men's travel writing. Right? Like, they don't talk about that. What's men's travel writing? I have no idea what that is.
Well, now that you're saying that, I'm thinking about that unfortunate moniker chick lit, right? And what would be the obvious, like, flip-flop to that? It'd be dick lit, right? So, I mean, why is that not a thing? I just don't understand why it's not a category.
It's a thing now, Yi Shun.
Yes, I have coined a phrase. We can shut this down. Excellent. Good stuff. I just, representation is so important, and I'm so excited for it, because I'm thinking about some of the books that have been published in the travel memoir sphere that are so popular, right? I mean, you've got Wild, of course, right? And then you have Under the Tuscan Sun, right? Which is another one. And then you've got, of course, the classic Eat, Pray, Love, right? And a lot of these books, you and I were talking about this earlier, like, I was so excited about your book because it doesn't fall into that neat, like something terrible happened to me, and so I had to do something outrageous and trek up and down places. I mean, to be fair, there is trekking in your book, but it's not handled that way. And I just hope that there is a change in that direction, right, where there's more normalized narratives.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about what have I read recently, or what's sort of more current. The book that I like a lot is Tracks, Robert Davidson's Tracks, right? That's a great book. And she just does a crazy thing because she wants to do a crazy thing. Like, that's your classic dude narrative, right? A guy, like, rides a motorcycle from the Arctic Circle to Tierra del Fuego, right? Like, that's happened a million times. Those stories will get published. And Robert Davidson's book is sort of a similar kind of thing. It's but she genuinely doesn't know what she's doing, right? To me, the most compelling part of that book is really at the beginning, where she's training the camels, and she's like, I don't know how, right? And she goes and does it anyway. That's that kind of like screw it, I'm gonna do this thing that I don't know how to do. And I guess Cheryl Strayed does some of that too, right? She's not really qualified or trained to do the trip that she goes on. But there's something that Under the Tuscan Sun and Eat, Pray, Love and a million other books like that fall into this they're romances. My book's not a romance. I don't think Tracks is a romance either.
Not by a long shot, right?
No,
exactly.
And so maybe that domesticated aspect of things is actually what they're looking for, is a romance novel, and fewer publishers specifically. I can't speak for the broad audience of global readers, because I think that women are having experiences. Of course they are. I see them in the world doing things like putting on shoes and going for a drive, but there's that aspect of, like, if there's not a romantic aspect to it.
Yeah, it's always a woman falling in love with something, with one activity or another, and there always is that kind of element of mysticism about it, isn't there? Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next generation and what they'll produce. There's some good stuff coming down the pipeline, so it's gonna be a good one.
Yeah.
All right. Wow.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you ended up here?
Yeah, actually, when I was looking at this, I was thinking to myself, this is actually kind of a contrary story, right? Because I genuinely thought that I was going to work for Outside Magazine one day, and I was going to be, a hard-charging outdoors journalist. And I got as far as meeting some wolf biologists while I was really hungover in Yellowstone National Park. And it just, like, while I was standing there, I was thinking to myself, I don't think I'm cut out for this because I can't remember any really good facts. Like, I'm not good at facts. I'm better at like emotional truths. I'm not really good at like, I don't know, conveying things in sort of a factual journalistic manner. So for me, it was like it was a pretty long journey towards becoming more of an emotional kind of truth teller, more than anything else. And for you though, it was like thinking about our two different tracks, and it's like you pretty much had the life that I wanted, and I thought I was gonna do.
Have you
Like
read the book?
well, so I mean, I love the fact, for instance, that, like, so you wrote for Lonely Planet, right? And you've written for a bunch of travel guides, and I think it's so interesting that Lonely Planet shows up in Same River twice, and then you go on to write for it later on, and it just seems like such a nice juxtaposition. Like, it's really, it's really good.
Yeah, I mean, I had the fever, so some of it was sort of inevitable, right? Like, I got the fever for travel really, really young, and I still have not shaken it. And so there was a vague inevitability about the fact that I would do this kind of work at some point. But just to be fully transparent, travel writing pays garbage most of the time. And I have a day job that doesn't pay garbage, doing technical documentation. And so I do like this much travel, and then there's a bunch of work that's down here that most people don't see because it's not sexy. And so I think there's a lot of, like, I don't have a patron spouse or a trust fund or a spouse that does a lot of travel and is able to take me with them, like, right? And travel media is really tragically, I think, driven in a large part by advertising, which means that they're not particularly interested in risky, opinionated stories because it's going to piss off their advertisers. Now, Lonely Planet, I think, was sort of unique in, so my editor, the editor who I worked with there the most, and also who is my co-founder at Statesider, Andy Murdoch, said that he had never worked with a crew of writers who were so willing to bite the hand that fed them, which was something that I loved about the early days of Lonely Planet. They were just like, screw it, I have these opinions, I hated the hotel, I don't care that they comped me, I don't care that they're a major advertiser in the magazine, I don't care about any of that stuff. Like, they were unvarnished early on. And that, when you come to travel with that sort of attitude, which is truly the best way you can serve your reader, publishers get itchy.
Yeah, it's a tricky proposition. I remember the days of the familiarization trips, right, where you would get these packages to go abroad, and you were expected to write about things in like a savory fashion, but thank goodness for the internet, right? Because we're about to write whatever we want to do and tell the unvarnished truth. So Stephanie is popped up, which means it's probably time for Q&A.
Yes.
Good.
I just have to say too, Lindy chimed in earlier. She had to leave early, but she just wanted to let everybody know that Yi Shun was a badass back when she was adventure racing, and all of her stories are true.
That's good to know.
That was great. And I was dying with laughter at your alternative to chick lit. That was the funniest thing I've heard all day. So thank you.
You're gonna build that shelf in, right? To Savoy books. Do it.
Yes. So funny. Okay. So we do have a couple of questions. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's fascinating. And I've been sitting here just trying to rack my brain thinking about all of the women writers that I know that women travel writers that I've read, and trying to figure out, like, a lot of them are romanticized. Yeah, it's been so interesting. I will say, I will plug a book from an up and coming writer. Her name is Lamorna Ash. She's from the UK, and she has a book coming out in December called Dark Salt Clear. And I think she starts out in the book living in London, and then she goes to a Cornish fishing village and spends some time on some of the trawlers and the boats in Cornwall. And it is very much not romanticized. She does it just for the sake of doing it. There's no crisis that kind of spurs this idea on, but she's fantastic. And I believe she's in her late 20s.
Cool.
She is kind of a younger writer that has done that.
That's awesome.
But what do you think needs to change? I feel like there's something more than just, needing more women writers, women travel writers, because I think that there is some part of the narrative needs to change, that your writing doesn't have to be romanticized in order to be good or valid in this space.
Well, I mentioned that part about the gatekeepers, right? We need new gatekeepers. I mean, it's always, when you look at corporate structures of any kind, right? If there's no diversity at the top, there's not going to be diversity down here, right? It's just not, right? And so there's definitely the idea of things need to be thrown over from the top down. The other thing is, to be fair, I think there's some really interesting writing happening in the world, in magazines, on the web, all that kind of stuff, right? Like, there's some amazing work happening. It's not always making it to the shelf in the bookstores, right? So if we're talking specifically about publishing and about what needs to change in publishing for more edgy, independent, non-traditional voices to make it to the shelf, then I feel like it's definitely a structural thing having to do with how publishing happens.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think one of the other things that needs to happen is there are certain reactions and types of work that are feminine, right, per se. And I'm thinking specifically about the places that we expect to see women and the ways that we expect them to react. And I think all those expectations need to kind of be burnt down. We need to like start all over and just kind of, I was thinking, so again, about my 7-year-old niece, it's my brother's kid. And I think my sister-in-law was telling me that if my niece would start to cry, my brother would automatically say, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. Right. I mean, and maybe the turnaround needs to be, it's okay to cry. It's strong to cry. This is the way that we get through life. Right. Crying may or may not be on my mind this entire week. I don't know, but it's one of these things where maybe we just need to sort of shift the paradigm, in a dynamic fashion for any of this to be able to happen. But I don't know what the machinations of that look like. I'm not quite sure if it means. I was just talking to somebody about this today, where it's like women are given fewer stretch assignments than men are. And when they fail at the stretch assignments, i.e. the assignments that that are a little bit outside of their normal work silo, those failures are blamed on the women themselves. Whereas when men fail in the stretch assignments, those failures are blamed on the situation. Okay, so what does that tell us, right? I mean, it's like, it's a failure of the system. Okay, so we need to somehow shift the paradigm so that we're not making those assumptions anymore, right?
Right. Great. That sounds great. All right. One other question. I'm curious just how COVID has affected statesider and undomesticated. And we did put the links to both of those sites in the chat for people to check out. But being that they're very much based on travel, and I'm just curious how you guys have found things to continue writing about, and what's that been like to create content for those sites?
Right. So there's two things. One is we're a mess. Right? Like we slowed down, for starters, right? We were publishing pretty consistently twice a month. And now we're lucky if we get something out every 3 to 4 weeks. It's just been really hard to focus, to get things done. The other thing is that we had always been way more interested in the ideas of American culture and how to experience that than we were in the physical act of traveling, right? And so there's still a lot happening around what it means to be American, which is at the underlying foundation of everything we do, like what's it mean to be American, that allows us to keep producing, you know?
Yeah.
So there's that. And the other thing that we're doing is, you know, everybody has a story, and sometimes they send them to us, which is fantastic, right? And so we are often a place where, you know, the two stories that are mentioned in the honorables here, we couldn't believe that people could not find bigger homes for those stories. They're such beautiful pieces of writing. And so a lot of people are sitting on stuff that they can't find a home for, right? And so they're coming to us saying, hey, will you take this story, because I've been trying to sell it for 2 years and nobody seems to want it. And we're like, you should go for a bigger market where you're going to get a bigger check, because we have nothing, hardly anything to give you. And they're like, yeah, I tried that. And so there's still a lot of stories out there that aren't being told. And so those are coming to us too. And it doesn't matter that they're 2, 3, 5 years old, because they're so transcendent of time that we're able to publish brand new to the world pieces that are maybe not new to the writer.
Sure.
I think it's so remarkable, you know, the fact that these stories have been sitting there for years, and how great it is that there is a venue for them in Statesider, right? And it just tells me that the industry has a lot of catching up to do. But for Undomesticated, basically what we're doing is we actually launched during the pandemic. We launched in early October. So it's really young, but basically what we're doing is meeting people where they are, right? So we're doing a series, for instance, on careers that are abroad, right? So folks who have moved abroad to be expats. And then we're also doing a lot on how to think universally or think broadly, even though we're kind of all grounded for now. So
yeah. Great. We're looking forward to reading more of those articles. All right, Edward has a question for you. You are talking about how publishers need to change, but you've both become self-publishers yourselves. Any thoughts about how it feels to be a self-publisher or a publisher of others' work versus how it feels to be a writer? Is self-publishing significant to the issues you have been talking about?
I think so. I think when we look for stories, we specifically put out calls for stories from Black and Brown voices. And so, you know, we're really making a specific ask for those voices that we see as being underrepresented. And obviously, let's not forget about the accessibility issue too, right? I mean, when we're talking about travel, we're not just talking about able-bodied people, right, who are traveling. We're talking about the disabled travel sector as well, right? So, you know, we're not just thinking about putting out calls for different ethnicities, but we're also talking about putting out calls for other underrepresented sectors of society. And I think the more people understand that their stories have value, because let's face it, we are in an industry of imposter syndrome, right? Nobody believes that their work is worth telling. And then when you've got these poor stories that are lying around it for 3 years because quote unquote, nobody wants them, like that must make you feel terrible about yourself, right? So you want to find a place for those stories to be published. And if we can be it, then that's really fantastic. And Pam, I'm going to let you answer while I look at Ed's question again, because I want to.
Yeah, I'm just reading it again myself too. So you know, I was a self-publisher. You know, I have my blog, and I've had my blog for a long time. Like I think I've had it for almost 20 years, and part of the reason I had it was because I didn't understand how to get past those gates, right? So I chose to self-publish because I didn't know, and I'm an accidental writer. I didn't train in this market. I didn't know how to pitch. I didn't know any of these things. And I was like, I guess I'm just going to do this myself. So I have known what it feels like to be a self-publisher for a very long time. And I love publishing other people's work. Actually, I love being the venue that, and it kills me that we can't pay more, right? Like I wish we had good funding, because it's a little bit heartbreaking that these stories that should be getting 4-figure checks are getting barely 3 from us. It makes me sad. And so, and it's very different than being a writer. Of course it is, right? Because it's not my work, right? But I also like the idea that publishing other stories by other writers, selecting stories by other writers, helps advance the point of view that we have with Statesider. which is, again, like all these things are worthy. All these stories deserve better homes. These voices deserve to be heard. We ran a story by a woman from Ecuador. Is she Ecuadorian? I am so sorry. My brain is just Swiss cheese all week. Anyway, she was visually impaired, and she wrote a piece for us about visiting the Walmart in Florida. It's so great. It's such a great piece. Because you know what? Like, I don't experience the Walmart like that, right? Like, that's just no way. I don't have that experience I don't want to go to the Miami Walmart. That's the last thing I want to do. So exciting to be able to like take a story like that and be like, yeah, this is a worthwhile point of view. And I'm excited to get to share it. We were just like skipping in the virtual hallways in the Statesider editorial room that she wanted us to have this story, because it's this very, I don't think it's a unique perspective in the true meaning of the word unique. It means like nobody else would have this perspective. Of course people have this perspective. You never get to see this story though, right? We don't get to read this story. We don't get to hear it. We were so excited to be the place where that story lives, and that is really satisfying. So that kind of satisfaction of being able to launch a story like that into the world is, it's a different kind of satisfaction than launching your own work. Like, it's a very different feeling, but it's still deeply satisfying to be able to give something like that to readers and have them get to experience it.
Yeah, and there's a sense of craft in that as well, right? I mean, on the other side of the coin, there is the person that you see who you know has a story to tell, but then you can work with them to craft the story that you want to appear, within the pages of your publication, right? And that can also come up with something really, really unique. Right? A lot of times we'll commission stories directly where we'll find somebody who is doing some really interesting things, and then we'll actually, hunt them down and talk, not in a violent fashion. But anyways, we'll go find them, and we will ask them, what do you think about doing a story based on this blog post, for instance, that you wrote, or based on this work experience that you have, right? We have a great piece coming out from a woman named Michaela Brown, who is a fashion anthropologist. And this is, it's as she explains it, it's something that you will never see anyplace else, because she basically made it up, right? But she has a degree in it. And it essentially is the idea of going to different independent boutiques and tracking back a piece's origin, right? An item of clothing's origin, right? And then, so we're crafting that, we're using that by way of helping people to get through the pandemic, right? When you can't travel, but you can maybe take a look at your local clothing boutique and discover these different cultures that are living in the fibers, right? So that's a thing that she wouldn't have come to me with, but because I know her, I was interested in this aspect of her life, and that's something we were able to craft with her. So yeah, it's really satisfying, really satisfying.
Very cool. Yeah, this is great. Unfortunately, we're right at time. So any final thoughts to sum up with, or do you want to tell us what you're reading right now?
Oh yeah, what I'm reading right now is a ton of Virginia Woolf.
Okay.
Which I am enjoying tremendously. And this is super reductive, so forgive me, but it feels like a lot of Virginia Woolf is men saying stuff to women, and then women going, oh, really? Is that how it is? And I'm enjoying that tremendously.
That's fantastic. I am reading, I think it's called Finding Faith by Faith Adeli, and it's a book about a woman who grows up in the United States. She's a Black woman, and she decides to go to Tibet and to Thailand to become a nun. So yeah, interesting piece of work. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Yi Shun and Pam. This has been so great. Your energy and your creativity are so evident. And this has been a really interesting conversation. I know I've enjoyed it. Just to remind everybody, this event has been recorded and it will be available later if you need to go back and rewatch, or if you missed any part of it. And of course, don't forget that you can order both of their books through the links that we posted in the chat earlier. So,
thank you. This was amazing, Stephanie. So great.
Thank
See you all
so
again
much.
soon.
Have a great night.
You too. Bye, everybody.